This is about a resolution that respects all aspects of the Good Friday Agreement and protects the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The period of purdah in the run-up to the Northern Ireland Assembly election is fast approaching. Does my right honourable friend acknowledge the need to make real, serious progress before that period commences? And does he anticipate that such progress will be made?
So state.
Look, I do think it's important that we get progress as quickly as possible, actually, regardless of the pre-election period in Northern Ireland, because every day that we're not seeing that flexibility from the EU is another day that consumers in Northern Ireland can't access products, that the Jewish community can't access, technically under the EU provisions, kosher food, that businesses can't get access to products they need, that over 200 Great Britain businesses are not supplying Northern Ireland. That affects the economy of both Northern Ireland and the wider UK, and we need to resolve that, and we need to do that as quickly as we possibly can.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Further to that answer, can I draw to the attention of the Secretary of State my constituent from Dromore, who is disabled and confined to a wheelchair. 3 weeks ago, the ramp on the back of her disability-adapted motor vehicle broke, and when she went to order the spare part from the supplier in England, she was told that they could not send that spare part to her because she was not registered with HMRC to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. This is precisely the kind of difficulty that the protocol is causing for ordinary people in Northern Ireland, and the idea that we just ignore it, sweep it under the carpet, forget about Article 16, ignores the rights of my constituents.
So state.
The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right. There are multiple examples out there, whether it is the Jewish community I just outlined, the individual case he had. We've all heard, I know he and I have both heard cases of other people unable to access products, goods, sometimes very, very important products for their lives, to be able to continue to live their lives in the way that any other citizen of the UK could. That isn't good enough. We also need to be very clear with the EU that their lack of flexibility at the moment is putting at risk the very thing that the protocol was there to protect, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland. So it is right that we keep the pressure on. We will strain every sinew. I hope the EU will show that flexibility and pragmatism to resolve the issue they now recognise, which is the protocol isn't working, and I have to say it's just not sustainable in its current form.
Sir Geoffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, households across all of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, are struggling because of rapidly increasing home heating costs. In Northern Ireland, we are subject to EU VAT rules. This means that if the Chancellor of the Exchequer sought to reduce VAT on home heating oil, he needs the permission of the European Union and all 27 member states to do such an action. Surely this cannot be right, that my constituents are being deprived of support they need from government because of the protocol.
Well, I'll say to the right honourable gentleman, obviously in February this year we put a further $250 million into the Executive to support, allow them the more flexibility on top of the underspend the Executive's got to support people at a time where there are these pressures. But he is also quite right in highlighting just another one of the many areas where the protocol is creating real problems on the ground for people in their everyday lives. And we must remember the protocol itself says it will not disrupt the everyday lives of people in their communities. He's giving yet another example where the protocol itself and the implementation of it is doing exactly that, and that has to stop.
SNP spokesperson Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I associate myself and my party with the remarks that the Secretary of State made at the outset about historical abuse victims and the forthcoming apology. Another important part of the Northern Ireland Protocol is Article 3, which says that the UK shall ensure that the common travel area and the rights and privileges associated therewith can continue to apply, in particular with respect to free movement to, from and within the island of Ireland for Union citizens and their family members, irrespective as to their nationality. Does the Secretary of State recognise the potential economic and political strain that introducing an electronic travel authorisation system could put on freedom of movement across the border? And what engagement does he plan to have with the Government of Northern Ireland, the Government of the Republic and their partners in the EU about how to make sure that such a set of frictions don't take effect?
Secretary of State.
Well, obviously, I'm sure he'll be aware that throughout the pandemic, we have made sure that we have kept the CTA itself, the Common Travel Area, flowing and open. That's not been the case from the Irish Government necessarily at certain points, but we have done that. We think it is important. We will continue to do that. I will be talking to, and I'm looking to be talking to further, my officials have been talking with the Irish Government about all of these issues this week and last week, and I will be continuing to do that myself as well.
We now come to John Long.
Two, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll answer questions 2, 4
and 6 together. Mr. Speaker, next month marks 75 years since the young Princess Elizabeth made her famous pledge, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." Mr. Speaker, my department is working closely with colleagues across government and will play our full part in celebrating the achievement of Her Majesty the Queen on the occasion of her Platinum Jubilee. Mr. Speaker, it will be the nation's opportunity to recognise all she has given to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, to express to her all she means to us, and to say to her with gratitude and in unity, long may she reign over us. God save the Queen.
John Lamont.
I'm grateful to the Minister for that response. I very much associate myself with his remarks. I know that the celebration of the Platinum Jubilee is going to be a cross-government effort, but can the Minister assure me that he's working with the devolved administrations too to ensure that this is an entire UK event where all parts of the United Kingdom are joining together to celebrate this momentous occasion?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. This is an occasion that should unite the whole of the United Kingdom, all regions and all nations of the United Kingdom. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, and I are working closely with local authorities and the government in Northern Ireland to make sure that this is something that brings communities together. Mr. Speaker, we will want to remember some of the 25 occasions the Queen has visited Northern Ireland, 3 of them as Princess Elizabeth and 22 of them as Queen. We want to involve young people and we want to use the opportunity of the Jubilee to celebrate the best of Northern Ireland.
Debbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently was proud to join colleagues from across the House in setting up the all-party parliamentary group for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Could the Minister tell us what steps he is taking to ensure this celebration extends across the United Kingdom and that it is used to showcase the benefits of our UK, with Northern Ireland as an integral part of it?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. This occasion should bring us all together. And in that light, and specifically with reference to Northern Ireland, I would like to welcome the comments of the leader of Sinn Féin, who said that she wanted to extend to the British Queen a word of congratulations because 70 years is quite some achievement. She said that's what you call a lifetime of service. Mr. Speaker, those comments have made it easier for us in Northern Ireland to celebrate this in all communities across the whole of Northern Ireland.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And the Platinum Jubilee presents a great opportunity to celebrate and reaffirm the place of all parts of our United Kingdom, especially Northern Ireland, which this year has celebrated its centenary year. Will my right honourable friend confirm that the celebrations will include UK-wide events, including in Northern Ireland, to celebrate all 70 years of Her Majesty's service, and will also encourage all primary school-aged children in North West Durham to take part in my competition to design a Platinum Jubilee card for Her Majesty?
The example that my honourable friend gives of the competition he's running in his own constituency, I'm sure, will be replicated across the House. I can give my honourable friend the assurance that Northern Ireland will participate in all of the national events around the Jubilee, the Platinum pudding competition, the big Jubilee lunch. This is a great celebration for us all to enjoy and is in a spirit of unity.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister was right to reflect on the comments from the leader of Sinn Féin. They are rare, and he will know that in Northern Ireland there still pervades a lack of generosity about the huge commitment and dignity that Her Majesty has shown our United Kingdom. He will also know that there's a stark contrast between the NIO's position on celebrating the centenary last year with the construction of a forum and the allocation of funds to a tame approach when it comes to the Platinum Jubilee. Can the Minister outline whether he will dedicate significant resource so we can celebrate this historic achievement in style?
Minister.
Well, look, firstly, Mr. Speaker, I don't totally agree with the characterisation of the honourable gentleman around the centenary programme that the Northern Ireland has run. I thought it was bold, I thought it was inclusive, and I thought it recognised the unique circumstances of Northern. Oh, you said you welcomed it? Sorry, I misheard you. So, Mr. Speaker, I apologise to the honourable gentleman. I'm so used to criticism from the party opposite that rare outbreak of consensus passed me by. I can give him my total assurance that we will be marking this Jubilee with full throttle joy and celebration, and my right honourable friend will be coming forward with some very innovative ideas of how we will mark it, especially in Northern Ireland.
Doesn't matter. Greg Smith.
Number 3, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions 3 and 5 together. And may I say especially to my honourable friend from Buckingham, it's particularly good to see him in his place today. Mr. Speaker, I recently attended the Northern Ireland Day at the Dubai Expo, where I met many Northern Irish businesses already exporting globally, including White's Oats, Hiverco and Greenfields. And we had the opportunity to meet with 2 sovereign wealth funds who I'm pleased to report to the House have accepted our invitation to come to Northern Ireland and look at the opportunities of investing in Northern Ireland as part of their programme of investing in the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that answer. Thanks to our exit from the European Union, the United Kingdom is able to strike trade deals around the world without being constrained by the bureaucrats in Brussels. So can my right honourable friend assure me that he is working with his colleagues in the Department for International Trade to ensure that businesses in Northern Ireland who export their products are given full and due consideration in all trade deal negotiations?
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable friend. I can assure them that as a former Minister of State for Trade Policy, I bring that worldview to my role as Minister of State in Northern Ireland. The short answer to his question is yes. I'm delighted that we've now opened a new Department for International Trade hub in the heart of Belfast. I've met recently with the Economy Minister Gordon Lyons at the Northern Ireland Showcase. We've introduced the Economy Minister Gordon Lyons to the President of the Board of Trade before Christmas. We put £8 million into Invest NI to help them promote Northern Ireland abroad. Northern Ireland is an integral part of the United Kingdom's offer to the world and will benefit fully from our international trade agreements.
Colin Eastwood.
Well, it's obviously important to bring investment into Northern Ireland. My constituents in Derry are struggling right now with soaring energy bills. Right down the border, a mile across the border, the Irish government is cutting vehicle excess duty by up to 20% for petrol and diesel. This government are very keen and very quick to raise NI contributions. They're also very quick to cut universal credit. Will they be quick to cut vehicle excise duty to save people from the soaring costs that are crippling home budgets?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, Mr. Speaker. Look, on the 3rd of February this year, the government announced that the Northern Ireland Executive will receive an additional £250 million to help it support households with the cost of living. He mentions tax changes. It would be imprudent of me as a junior minister to comment ahead of the Chancellor making statements to the House.
Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. It was a real pity that we couldn't land the return of the World Rally Championship to Belfast in 2022. Could the Minister please confirm that we're going to pull out all of the stops for 2023?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can. We did extensive work with the Department for the Economy. The member for North Antrim was heavily involved in lobbying on that. We think it will be a great thing to bring Northern Ireland, and we are determined to build on the work that we have already done to see if that is possible next year.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Last week, with members of the UK Trade and Business Commission, we were in Northern Ireland where we heard from a major supermarket about the impact that the protocol could have in the future if the grace periods no longer exist. I listened carefully to the Secretary of State's answer to his honourable friend earlier when he suggested an SPS as the way forward. Could we just be clear that the government is seeking an SPS agreement with the EU which does differentiate between the goods that are at risk of going into the EU and those which are not?
Well, firstly, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, who I hold in high regard, I was delighted that he was in Northern Ireland to hear firsthand some of the challenges that Northern Ireland is facing. What we are seeking with the protocol, and we've been very, very clear, the Secretary of State, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, is to take the protocol back in its application to how it was intended. And it says in the protocol, the application of the protocol should impact as little as possible on the everyday lives of communities in Northern Ireland. It also references the importance of maintaining the integral place of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom's internal market. The disruption that the implementation of the protocol is having in Northern Ireland is not sustainable, which is why the government is committed to finding a negotiated solution.
Shadow Minister Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On inward investment, Mr. Speaker, the realisation of the redevelopment of Casement Park, a third sporting stadium in Belfast, would give Northern Ireland the opportunity to host sporting events on an international stage and bring communities together. What input or influence, if any, has the Secretary of State on this and his Minister? And The £1.2 billion that the Northern Ireland Executive have returned to the Treasury since 2016, could this be used to realise such projects for Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the comments from the Labour front bench. We look at a whole range of opportunities for investment in Northern Ireland, to give Northern Ireland the opportunity to attract inward investment, to be able to host international events. That's going to be a core part of what we're able to do through levelling up. It's also a key thing the Secretary of State and I have been driving through our city and growth deals to help Northern Ireland, help communities in Northern Ireland attract that investment that creates jobs and prosperity, which is the best way to underpin peace.
Rob Butler.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Northern Ireland Ministers' Elections and Petitions and Concern Act was specifically designed to improve the sustainability of the Northern Ireland institutions. The benefits do include allowing more time and space for the formation of the Executive following an election or the resignation of the First or Deputy First Minister.
Butler.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to serve on the Bill Committee for this legislation, and it's now clear that it was timely given the recent resignations of Northern Ireland's First Minister and Deputy First Minister. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he's emphasising to Northern Ireland's political parties that they all need to play their part to work together to achieve stable, devolved government?
Secretary of State.
Yes, I can assure my honourable friend he's absolutely right. I do obviously continue to speak to a range of stakeholders, including the party leaders in Northern Ireland, on the importance of strong, functioning Northern Ireland Executive. And a couple of them in this room this afternoon who I've expressly spoken to and said my desire and talked to them about the importance of having a First and Deputy First Minister nominated both now and after the elections in May.
Stephen Furry.
The government has been clear that it wants to legislate for the language and culture package of NDNA before the Assembly rises for its election. That is only 2 weeks away now. Is that pledge still going to happen in the next 2 weeks?
The honourable gentleman makes a fair point. I'm absolutely committed to making sure we deliver on our promise, as is the Prime Minister, as we set out last summer, to make sure we are delivering on all of our commitments, actually, in the new decade new approach deal that was agreed and brought Stormont back.
Yes. Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I would like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions to Prime Minister. I start with Pauline Latham.
Question number 1, sir.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Never before has this House listened to an address like the one given yesterday by President Zelensky. And so I want to tell the House that, working with our friends and allies across the free world, we will be doing even more in the coming days to protect the people of Ukraine. And, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, will be setting out more details for the House later on. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Pauline Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My son Ben died from an aortic dissection at age 44, leaving a wife and 2 young children, a condition which kills 2,000 people every year needlessly, more than die on the roads. Most people do not know anything about this condition until it devastates their family, like mine. So many of these cases are preventable by identifying those at risk and early and accurate diagnosis. Would the Prime Minister commend the work of the Aortic Dissection Charitable Trust in working with all aspects of the patient pathway about this condition, and in particular, will he commit to public funding for research into the diagnosis of aortic dissection and into genetic screening for it?
Prime Minister.
May I say to my honourable friend first how very sorry I am, as I'm sure the whole House is, for the loss of her son, Ben. And she's a passionate advocate for this work, and I thank the Aortic Dissection Charitable Trust. She's obviously, Mr. Speaker, completely right that accurate, fast diagnosis and treatment is crucial, and that's why I'm very pleased that the National Institute for Health Research is looking to do further work in this area, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will meet her at his earliest convenience.
Now comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The typical energy bill is going up by £700 next month, and that's because of pressures before Russia invaded Ukraine. The Chancellor's solution? A forced £200 loan for every household, paid back in mandatory instalments over 5 years. The big gamble behind that policy was that energy costs would drop quickly after a short spike. That bet now looks certain to fail. When will the Prime Minister force the Chancellor into a U-turn?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my Honourable Friend the Chancellor has set out plans to help families with energy costs, with unprecedented measures to abate council tax by £150, Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the other schemes that we are putting forward. And I can tell the House that, yes, he's absolutely right. That we need to meet the long-term impacts of the spike in energy prices, and that's why I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term and with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Prime Minister understands the mess he's in. Working families are facing a £700 spike in April. They won't even receive their £200 loan from the Chancellor until October. The wholesale price of oil and gas is now ballooning. So, by October, when the loan finally comes in, household bills are set to shoot up by another £1,000. It's a total mess. So I ask again, when is the Prime Minister going to force the Chancellor to U-turn?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if he's asking for the Chancellor to U-turn on the support that we're giving to families and households, I think that he's absolutely out of his mind. We are going to continue to give people support throughout this difficult period, as we did throughout the coronavirus epidemic, Mr. Speaker, with unprecedented levels of support. We have a £200 discount on bills, £150 non-repayable reduction in council tax, and £144 million extra to help councils support vulnerable families with their energy bills. Altogether, Mr. Speaker, there is a £20 billion package of financial help that we are giving the British people, and we will continue to do more. I think a U-turn, Mr. Speaker, is the last thing we want.
Mr. Speaker, we'll see how long that position lasts. Let me try and help the Prime Minister. Let me try and help the Prime Minister by coming at it from a different angle. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, North Sea oil and gas companies were making bumper profits. BP made £9.5 billion. Shell made £14 billion. In their own words, more money than they know what to do with. Since then, the international price of oil and gas has skyrocketed, and so will their profits. When will the Prime Minister admit he's got this badly wrong, put a windfall tax on those super profits, and use the money to cut household energy bills?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the net result of that would simply be to see the oil companies put their prices up yet higher, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, make it more difficult for them to do what we need them to do, and which I think, by the way, Mr. Speaker, they are doing very responsibly at the moment, and that is divesting from dependence on Russian oil and gas. And that is the way forward for this country. It is to take a sober, responsible approach, end our dependence on hydrocarbons altogether, and particularly Russian hydrocarbons, and we are taking steps to rectify some of the mistakes made by the Labour government and have a long-term, sustainable, independent energy supply policy. That's what this country needs.
Protecting energy profits, not working people. Doesn't that say it all? Britain can't afford another crisis like this. We need to improve our long-term energy security. That starts with supporting new nuclear and renewables. But the Conservatives have effectively banned new onshore wind. As a direct result of this short-sighted approach, we're using more gas every year than we import from Russia. That's ludicrous. So will the Prime Minister relax planning laws, end the block on onshore wind, and stop supporting policies that make us so dependent on foreign gas?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to the policies that this government has pursued that we actually only are dependent on Russian gas for 3% of our gas needs, unlike virtually every other European country, Mr. Speaker. It's thanks to the massive investment that we've had in renewables, Mr. Speaker, that we are, as I've said many times in this House, the Saudi Arabia of wind power, producer of more offshore wind than virtually any other country in the world, Mr. Speaker. And I think he just, by the way, I think he just committed to supporting, this may be news to some of his party, but he just committed to supporting more nuclear power. Great news. There is more joy in heaven, Mr. Speaker. There is more joy in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, Mr. Speaker, than over 100. I'm delighted. And those were the people, Mr. Speaker, who cancelled our nuclear efforts. They were in power. They did completely the wrong thing. I'm delighted to welcome them now into the fold.
Come off it. Labour is pro-nuclear. This Prime Minister can't get a single brick laid of a new nuclear plant. Energy security isn't just about supply. It's also about reducing demand. Our housing stock is the least efficient in Europe. That's why Labour set out a plan to upgrade the 19 million British homes that desperately need it within a decade, saving families £400 on their energy bill and cutting UK gas imports by 15%. Whereas all the government have is a failed policy. Taking all their announcements together, it will take 75 years to deliver the upgrades that we need. That's a lifetime when we need urgent action. When is the Prime Minister going to get on with it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just remind the House that under the Labour government, our nuclear output fell from I think about 25% to about 10% of our energy needs. As I recall, it was because of the decisions that they took. We're now going to rectify it, Mr. Speaker, and we're helping households. He asked about the cost of energy bills. We're helping households with the cost of energy bills to the tune of £9.1 billion. Now, why can this government afford to do that? Why can we afford to put huge quantities of taxpayers' money into supporting households and their energy costs? I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker. It's because we got the fastest growth in the G7. And don't forget that if we'd listened to Captain Hindsight, we'd have stayed in lockdown and we'd have never achieved it, Mr. Speaker.
12 years in power, that's the best he can do. The Ukrainian people. Mr. Speaker, the Ukrainian people are fighting for democracy. We must stand with them. That means taking the toughest possible measures against Putin. And let's be honest, there will be costs here at home. We can withstand those costs, and we must, by using a windfall tax to keep bills down for working people. By starting a new era of energy policy, never again at the mercy of a dictator, supporting new nuclear after years of neglect, sprinting on renewables, including onshore wind, and an urgent national mission to upgrade homes, ending years of dither and delay. So why is the Prime Minister offering the same failed energy policy that cast us into the security crisis and allowed bills to rocket?
Mr. Speaker,
Sorry, Prime Minister. I want to hear the answer, but also standing up's not going to catch my eye. In fact, it's got the opposite effect on me. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we are junking is the failed energy policies that left us without enough nuclear power, Mr. Speaker. And what we are going to do is go forward with policies that allow this country to be independent in our energy supply, maximising renewables, Mr. Speaker, making sure that we use transitional hydrocarbons and going for nuclear as well. As I say, I'm overjoyed that Labour now seems to occupy that position. But what we will also do, Mr. Speaker, and here he has been supportive, is make sure that as a House of Commons we work together to maintain our opposition to Vladimir Putin's vile war in Ukraine. And there, together with the toughest possible economic sanctions, by maintaining our military support for the people of Ukraine, I have no doubt that though there will be dark days ahead and difficult times, Mr. Speaker, we will come through it stronger. And I have no doubt that Vladimir Putin will fail and we will succeed in restoring a sovereign and independent Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For over 2 decades, Thames Water has been trying to build a reservoir in my constituency that would be over 30 metres high and cover the equivalent of over 2,500 football pitches. This has been a shadow over the local community, who don't think they've proven the need for this proposal. Does my right honourable friend agree that if a company seeks to do something like this, it has to show why it's needed, why it's better than the alternatives, and what the environmental impact will be? They can't behave as though it's inevitable, whether the local community want it or not.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. He's a fantastic champion for his constituents in Wantage. As I understand it, the decision on the Abingdon Reservoir has not actually been made, but we would expect Thames Water to consult further on the proposal, and I know that they will have heard the points that my honourable friend has rightly made.
We now come to SNP leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are now 14 days into Putin's war, and in that time I've generally tried to work constructively with the UK government, and I will continue to seek to do this. However, nobody should support this government when it comes to the response to the refugee crisis. 760 visa approvals in 2 weeks is disgraceful. In that time, Poland has taken over 1.2 million refugees. Hungary has taken over 190,000 refugees. Germany has taken over 50,000 refugees. Italy, over 7,000 refugees. Ireland, a country of just over 5 million people, has given sanctuary to 3 times as many refugees as the United Kingdom. These numbers don't lie. They tell a devastating truth. Does the Prime Minister find it acceptable that his Home Secretary has overseen one of the slowest, most bureaucratic and incompetent refugee responses in the whole of Europe?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody sympathises with the plight of refugees, and this government wants to do everything we can to welcome them, and that is indeed what we are doing. And the numbers are almost 1,000 as I speak to him today, and they will rise very sharply, Mr. Speaker. They are uncapped. We expect those numbers to rise to in the region of the hundreds of thousands. As Vladimir Putin doubles down in his attacks, we will go further, Mr. Speaker, and there will be routes by which the whole country can offer a welcome to people from Ukraine, vulnerable people fleeing from Ukraine. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will be setting out that route in the course of the next few days. This government has a proud record. We've done more to resettle vulnerable people than any other European country since 2015.
Ian Blackford.
I don't think the Prime Minister understands the scale of the challenge or the urgency. These are people fleeing war crimes, torn apart from their families as their homes are shelled, and the Home Secretary is blocking them with endless paperwork. This isn't just incompetence, this is ideology. In the face of the biggest refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War, the UK government won't set aside the hostile environment. And by the way, we're seeing the hostile environment this afternoon. They might quieten down a bit. We've seen this too many times from a Tory Home Office. The Windrush scandal, the go-home vans, the inhumane Nationality and Borders Bill. The UK Home Office is raising barriers and bureaucracy when we should be offering care and compassion. Prime Minister, do not let the history of failure repeat itself. Scotland stands ready to offer sanctuary and refuge. So will the Prime Minister join with the rest of the European continent and waive the visa restrictions for refugees fleeing war in Ukraine?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this country has an unparalleled record. And look, just since I have been Prime Minister, look at the numbers we've taken from Afghanistan, from Hong Kong. Mr. Speaker, he lectures the Home Secretary. This is a government unlike any other. The Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Home Secretary are directly descended, Mr. Speaker, from refugees. And we understand how much refugees have to give to this country, and we understand how much this country has to gain from welcoming refugees. And we will be generous, and we are being generous, Mr. Speaker. And what we are doing is making sure that in those neighbouring countries, the UK is out in front, giving the humanitarian assistance. And we are in every capital, Mr. Speaker. They laugh, Mr. Speaker, they mock, they scoff. This country is leading in every respect, but we are also the single biggest donor of humanitarian aid to the Ukraine war zone, Mr. Speaker. The single biggest donor, and he should be proud of that.
Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Prime Minister's response to this Ukrainian crisis, but I think people across the country are genuinely concerned on our response on refugees, on the bureaucracy, on the tone of our response. He's shown with vaccines that government change really comes from the very top. Please can I urge him to look at again on resetting our policy and taking control of a more humane approach to those women and men fleeing from Ukraine.
I thank him very much. He will have. I thank him very much. I thank him for all the work that he does in this area. But I hope he will have heard what I've just said in my earlier answer to the leader of the SNP, which is, Mr. Speaker, that this government is, I think, unlike any other in our understanding of what refugees can give and the benefits to this country. And we want. We've done more than any other to resettle vulnerable people since 2015. I think that there is a huge opportunity now for us to do even more, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will be setting out a route by which the British people, not just the family reunion route, which can run into the hundreds of thousands, Mr. Speaker, but also a route by which everybody in this country can offer a home to people fleeing Ukraine. And my right honourable friend will be setting that out in the course of the next few days.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be acutely aware of the pressures facing households across the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland, with the rapid increase in the cost of heating homes and running a motor vehicle. Heating a home has more than doubled for many households in Northern Ireland in recent weeks. Will the Prime Minister commit to bring forward a package of measures designed to help households, including a cut in VAT on home heating fuel, reducing or cutting excise duty on fuel for motorists? And will he ensure that those measures apply to Northern Ireland, where the Northern Ireland Protocol once again presents a problem in this government taking control over the affairs of all of the United Kingdom? Will the decisions that the Treasury take apply to the whole of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will make sure that we do everything to support the people of the whole of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, and we've already extended a further £250 million to help the people of Northern Ireland with the costs of living, particularly heating. As he knows, excise on fuel has been frozen for the last 12 years, and we will ensure that the people of Northern Ireland continue to be protected, along with everybody in the UK, from the cost of living crisis. But the House should be in no doubt that the pressures on energy will continue. We need a pan-UK solution, and that's what we're going to be setting out.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, the world has changed. Energy security is vital, but so too is food security. Our food and drink manufacturers and those in the food chain proved their worth during the pandemic. Given the importance to our country of this sector and the need to ensure its competitiveness, its resilience and a high degree of self-sufficiency, will the Prime Minister now take the opportunity to review many of the proposed regulatory burdens, such as HFSS and the promotional and marketing restrictions, which could adversely affect this important sector at this critical time?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right that food security is a crucial issue, and it is affected, of course, by the cost of energy. And the energy inputs into agriculture are certainly something that we need to address. There is also a separate issue, Mr. Speaker, to do with childhood obesity. The House passed measures already in the autumn, the ones to which he refers. We're giving the industry more time to adjust to the impact of those measures.
Graham Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, in addition to the increase in fuel prices, our constituents are reporting to us that the energy companies are doubling standing charges. In France, energy supply company EDF has had energy price rises to domestic customers capped at 4%. But this government price cap allows EDF to increase prices to UK customers by 54%. Ooh. My question is why?
Mr. Speaker, we have an overall cap, and obviously the EDF is incorporated differently in the UK from its incorporation in France. But we will do everything in our power to abate the costs of energy across the country, as we already are, Mr. Speaker. But what it needs is a short-term, medium-term and long-term energy strategy so that we have sustainable supplies.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Soon after I was elected, I found out that at Shotley Bridge, an 8-bedroom community, bed community hospital in my constituency is replaced with a 0-bed unit, something some Labour councillors had known about but said nothing about during the election campaign. After campaigning hard with ministers and the Secretary of State and working with my local NHS trust, a new 16-bed unit is now in the final stages of planning and has been confirmed as part of this government's hospital building programme. Can the Prime Minister confirm that this new community hospital is now full steam ahead, and will he commit to coming to concert to kick off the building works if the plan goes to head by the end of next year?
The Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted there'll be a new hospital at Shotley Bridge. I congratulate him on all the work he's done to lobby for it. And, Mr. Speaker, what it proves that this government is getting on, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of war in Ukraine, this government is getting on with the job.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've just been to a very harrowing meeting with families affected. They have members of families in care homes and hospitals, and they've suffered unjustifiable denial of access to those loved ones, and it's been massively restricted. And it continues despite the post-COVID environment. Would the Prime Minister be prepared to introduce legislation to make access to loved ones in care homes and hospitals a legal right and not at the discretion of the care home or the hospital concerned?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and I think everybody understands the anguish of people who haven't been able to see their loved ones during the pandemic. We have relaxed the restrictions in care homes, as he knows. I'd be very happy to offer a meeting for him and the relevant health minister to discuss his further concerns.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, the government's already stopped issuing golden visas, so they can't be exploited by oligarchs and crime lords. But some could already be here, living in luxury London penthouse flats they've bought with dirty cash. So, will the Prime Minister pledge that anybody who is put on the sanctions list in the coming days and is already in the UK on a golden visa will have it ripped up so they can be thrown out?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that, and I thank the House for what we've done to accelerate the economic crime measures, because we will be able to whip aside the veil of anonymity. Mr. Speaker, the ownership of these luxurious dwellings to which he refers will be exposed, and yes, we will be able to take away their ability to remain in this country.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As energy costs spiral, I want to raise the issue for people who use extra electricity to charge their electric wheelchairs or to run ventilators or a stair lift. It is not right that people with a disability or a serious medical condition should face unmanageable debt or going without food to pay the cost of electricity on which they absolutely rely. They need a real cut to their bills right now. So why isn't the Prime Minister looking at drawing on the profits of the North Sea oil and gas companies to help the most vulnerable families with those costs?
I thank her very much. She raises a very important issue, and clearly the spike in energy prices is going to fall most heavily on vulnerable people such as the ones that she has mentioned, and we will certainly be looking at ways to abate their costs.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you. I don't know what I've done to deserve that. Residents in the village of Hamble in my constituency are currently facing the prospect of a quarry being given planning permission with 144 lorries per day in this congested area with one road access. Will my right honourable friend agree to meet with me to discuss how we can tighten the regulations on where quarries can be built to take into account the health implication, our environment and our local communities?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's a great champion for Eastleigh. The planning framework is robust and should ensure that quarries don't have an adverse impact on the environment or on health, but I'll make sure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss his concerns further.
Abhinav Pongasari.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen in recent weeks how serious and dangerous Russia's covert influence in Britain can be. Yeah. We have seen that Putin actively seeks to influence the culture, media and politics of democratic nations. Yeah. Our national security is of the greatest importance, and Britain cannot become home to those that prop up Putin and his war. With that in mind, has the Prime Minister ever overruled security service advice when appointing a peer to the other place?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, and actually the Kremlin has singled out the UK for being in the lead on global sanctions, and as they have, and Mr. Speaker, in leading the world in defiance of the odious war that Putin is leading in Ukraine.
Greg Clark.
Yesterday, President Zelensky drew on the words of Churchill in this chamber. And as we salute the courage of the people of Ukraine, it reminds us that we can meet in freedom today only because of the courage of a generation of men and women who, in the Second World War, defended us from annihilation. Among them is my friend, Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell, DFC, who flew his de Havilland Mosquito in 50 missions over Nazi Germany. Colin Bell is with us today. On Saturday, he celebrated his 101st birthday. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing Colin a very happy birthday and thanking him for what he did for allowing us to be here today?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House will want to join me in thanking him and wishing Colin Bell a very happy 101st birthday.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People across these islands have displayed remarkable generosity, including in Argyll and Bute, where Oban Helps Ukraine have been overwhelmed by donations of money, of clothes and of offers of shelter. Sadly, this government's reluctance to allow fleeing women and children to come here lags far behind the desire of the people here to provide them with a roof and a bed. Doesn't the Prime Minister fear that when this war is concluded, and despite whatever else it may have done, that his government will stand accused of lacking the one thing the Ukrainian people needed most: basic humanity?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I really don't think that question reflects the views of people around the world, and nor does it, Mr. Speaker, does it reflect reality, because this government has done more than any other European country to support people by way of direct bilateral humanitarian aid, Mr. Speaker, and we have two very generous schemes for allowing people to come to this country. This is a government that believes in welcoming people fleeing from zones of conflict. And, Mr. Speaker, if he shakes his head, look at our record. Look at what we've done. Just in the last 2 years, and he should be proud. He should be proud of what we've done.
Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were pleased to welcome both the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State to Blackpool the day after the launch of the Doubling Up White Paper. Will he meet with me to discuss how we can make sure that Blackpool is not just a testbed for innovation in many of the areas of Doubling Up, but a showcase for the impact it can have on the community that I represent?
I thank him for his wonderful work in Blackpool for communities he represents, and it was fantastic to be with him and to see the increase, the extension and the upgrading of the tram network in Blackpool, Mr. Speaker, that will help to drive the economy and help to bring high-wage, high-skilled jobs in just the way that we hope to do that across the whole of the UK as we get on with levelling up.
Ed David.
Speaker, in the months before World War II, the UK took in over 60,000 Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. Over half a century ago, we took in over 27,000 Ugandans expelled by Idi Amin. Since then, we've taken Tamils escaping civil war, Bosnians escaping genocide, and Syrians escaping Assad. But this week, the Home Office turned away hundreds of Ukrainian refugees escaping Putin's bombs because they didn't have the right paperwork. Can the Prime Minister not see that this flies in the face of our country's proud tradition of providing sanctuary? And since the Home Office clearly isn't up to the task, will the Prime Minister send in armed forces personnel to speed up the process so Ukrainian refugees can come here quickly and safely?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank him very much, and the whole House wants to do as much as we can and as fast as possible. But what he says about the UK is, I'm afraid, completely wrong, Mr. Speaker, because we have visa centres open in Warsaw, in Budapest, in Prague, in Jeszczał, in Poland, in Chisinau, in Moldova, Bucharest, and elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. We've already got 1,000 people in under the existing scheme. That number will climb very sharply, Mr. Speaker. Look at what we've done already. 15,000 from Afghanistan, 104,000 applications from Hong Kong Chinese, and I think there were about 25,000 from Syria. No one has been turned away, Mr. Speaker. That is simply, we want to be as generous and Mr. Speaker. It is important to have checks. Let me make this point to the House, because I think people need to understand. There are some people, Mr. Speaker, who would like to dispense with checks altogether and simply to wave people through. And I've got to say, and I hear the voices on the benches opposite. I do think that is irresponsible, and that is not the approach that we should be taking. The Schengen countries have a different arrangement. We must be in no doubt, as I said in answer to a previous question, the Kremlin has singled out this country for the approach that we are taking. Vladimir Putin, and we know how unscrupulous Putin can be in his methods. It would not be right, Mr. Speaker, to expose this country to unnecessary security risk, and we will not do it, Mr. Speaker. We are going to be as generous as we can possibly be, but we must have checks.
Billy.
Mr. Speaker, my community in Tipton came together on Sunday to commemorate the 100 years since the devastating explosion of the Dudley Port munitions factory and the 19 girls who were recklessly murdered by the owner of that factory. Now, in the Black Country, it's vital that we acknowledge both the pride but also the pain of our industrial heritage. And can I ask my right honourable friend, therefore, to ensure that, to reaffirm his commitment today to the Black Country, to ensure that we honour that legacy of those girls in that factory in Dudley Port 100 years ago. And the one way that my right honourable friend can do that for my community in Tipton is to come to Tipton, Mr. Speaker, and see that beating heart of the Black Country who will welcome him with open arms.
Well, Mr. Speaker, long ago, when I was a reporter, Tipton was on my beat many years ago, and wild horses wouldn't keep me away from Tipton. I'll be back.
Ronnie Cowan's final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I have a constituent whose elderly parents are seeking refuge in the United Kingdom from Ukraine. Her parents are both in their 80s. They've made it to Hungary. They went to the visa application centre, as instructed by the Home Office hotline, and they were told, come back on the 22nd of March. Then, and only then, will their biometrics be processed. That is a harsh reality, no spin, no subterfuge. Prime Minister, when will refugees from the Ukraine be welcome into the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Listen, I thank him. If you'd be kind enough, I'd be grateful if he'd pass me the details of the case that he mentions, and I'd be happy to give it to my right honourable friend. We are moving heaven and earth, Mr. Speaker, because we understand the value to this country of refugees. We also understand the imperative of helping people fleeing a war zone in terror, and that's why the people of this country want to open their arms, and we are going to help them to do it, Mr. Speaker, with a new humanitarian route in addition to the family reunion route that we have already set out. That family reunion route alone, Mr. Speaker, could bring hundreds of thousands of people here, and I think the whole House understands that. We will do even more through the new humanitarian route.
That's the end of Prime Minister's questions. Please leave quietly. All right, John. So we now come to the statement from the Secretary of State for Defence, Right Honourable Ben Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to update the House on the situation in Ukraine and HMG support to the government in Kiev. Mr. Speaker, the situation on the ground is grave. As we can recall, on the 24th of February, forces of the Russian army, unprovoked, crossed into Ukraine's sovereign territory. Along three main axes, Russian armour has attempted to occupy Ukraine. Their plan was to reach and encircle Kyiv, encircle Ukrainian forces near the border, and invade from the south to link up with their forces via Mariupol. Russian High Command had committed 65% of their entire land forces and indisputably are in possession of overwhelming firepower and armour. It is estimated that at the start of this invasion they had between 110 and 120 battalion tactical groups dedicated to the task, compared to approximately 65 in Ukraine. Their missile stocks gave them even greater strength to reach Ukraine at distance. However, what they did not possess, and still do not, is the moral component so often needed for victory. Mr. Speaker, after 14 days of the war, according to the Ukrainian General Staff at the 6th of March, Russian casualties were assessed to include 285 tanks, 985 armoured fighting vehicles, 109 artillery systems, 50 multiple launch rocket systems, 44 aircraft, 48 helicopters, and 11,000 soldiers who have lost their lives needlessly. There are numerous reports of surrenders and desertions by the ever-growing, disillusioned Russian army. But to be clear, Mr. Speaker, these are Ukrainian figures, and I have to caution the House that we have not verified them by defence intelligence or other means. Of the initial Russian objectives, I can announce to the House that it is our assessment that they have been successful in achieving only one. And while Russian forces are in control of Kherson, Melitopol, Berdyansk in southern Ukraine, they currently encircle the cities of Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkov and Mariupol, but are not in control of them. In addition, Mr. Speaker, their first-day objectives of targeting Ukrainian air defence has failed, preventing total air dominance. The Ukrainian armed forces have put up a strong defence while mobilising the whole population. President Putin's arrogant assumption that he would be welcomed as a liberator has deservedly crumbled as fast as his troops' morale. For our part, Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom continues to play a leading role in supporting Ukraine. On the 17th of January, I announced to the House the government's intentions to supply military aid to the Ukrainian armed forces. The aid took the form of body armour, helmets, boots, ear defenders, ration packs, rangefinders and communication equipment, and for the first time, it also included weapon systems. The initial supply was to be 2,000 new light anti-tank weapons, small arms and ammunition. Mr. Speaker, in response to further acts of aggression by Russia, we have now increased that supply. I can update the House that as of today, we have delivered 3,615 NLAWs and continue to deliver more. We will shortly be starting the delivery of small consignment of anti-tank Javelin missiles as well. I want to assure the House that everything we do is bound by the decision to supply defensive systems and are calibrated not to escalate to a strategic level. Britain was the first European country to supply lethal aid, and I was pleased that not long after a military aid donor conference I held on the 25th of February, that many more countries decided to do the same. From right across Europe, the donations came. In particular, I want to highlight the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Poland, Romania, the Baltic states, Belgium and Slovenia for their leadership. And we should not ignore the significance of the German government in joining us in a change of stance and donating such aid. Donations, Mr. Speaker, are not enough. The delivery of the aid to the front line is just as important. Here again, Britain is leading, because alongside Canada, the United States and Sweden, we have invested in building Ukrainian military capacity since 2015, and we find ourselves able to coordinate the delivery alongside our partners. As the conflict intensifies, Mr. Speaker, the Russians are changing their tactics, and so the Ukrainians need to too. We can all see the horrific devastation inflicted on civilian areas by Russian artillery and airstrikes, indiscriminate and murderous. It is vital, therefore, that Ukraine maintains its ability to fly and to suppress Russian air attack. To date, the international community has donated over 900 man-portable air defence missiles and thousands of anti-tank guided weapons of varying types, as well as various small arms. But the capability needs strengthening. So in response to Ukrainian requests, the government has taken the decision to explore the donation of Starstreak high-velocity man-portable anti-air missiles. We believe that this system will remain within the definition of defensive weapons, but will allow the Ukrainian force to better defend their skies. We shall also be increasing the supplies of rations, medical equipment and other non-lethal military aid. As with any war, the civilian population is suffering horrendous hardships. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Education, 211 schools have been damaged or destroyed, and media footage shows Russian strikes hitting kindergartens. The Chernihiv Regional Administration reported that Russian Air Force was employing FAB 500 unguided bombs against targets in the city. And according to Human Rights Watch, civilians in Mariupol have now been without water and power for almost a week. President Zelensky talked of children dying of thirst. Today, the estimated number of Ukrainian civilians killed or injured now stands at over 1,000. The true figure is expected to be much higher, and I'm afraid worse is likely to come. It is for that reason that the UK will increase its funding for Ukraine to 220 million, which includes 120 million of humanitarian aid. This will make the United Kingdom the single biggest bilateral humanitarian donor to Ukraine. We're also supporting humanitarian work with the Polish and Romanian governments on the borders. As I said, Mr. Speaker, in my last statement, we still believe it is worth trying to build diplomatic pressure on Russia. This week, my good friend the Prime Minister met the Prime Ministers of Canada, the Netherlands and Poland. He also spoke to the leaders of France, Germany and the United States, and Prime Ministers of Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. The Foreign Secretary is in Washington at the G7 and also attended NATO foreign ministers earlier this month. And I myself only this morning met with the Ukrainian ambassador. President Putin should be and can be in no doubt that the international community is united against his actions. It remains strong and will not back down. As well as providing direct military support to Ukraine, we continue to bolster our contribution towards NATO's collective security. NATO defence ministers will gather next week in Brussels to discuss the next steps. The UK is doing its bit in providing military support and reassurance to its allies. We are currently supplying significant air power to NATO, including increase in air patrols with both Typhoon and F-35s under NATO air policing. We have also deployed additional 4 Typhoons to Cyprus to patrol NATO's eastern border and sent an additional 800 troops to Estonia. Over the last week, Apache and Chinook helicopters were involved in exercises in Estonia. And meanwhile, HMS Diamond has sailed to the eastern Mediterranean. HMS Northumberland is taking part in a northern deployment, and HMS Grimsby is in the Norwegian Sea, supporting NATO mine countermeasures. On Monday, HMS Prince of Wales, RFI Third Surge and HMS Defender joined HMS Albion and RFA Mounts Bays on exercise Cold Response, a multinational exercise off the coast of Norway. And HMS Richmond will be exercising with our Joint Expeditionary Force. We have put more than 1,000 more British troops on readiness to support humanitarian responses in the bordering countries. Britain's contribution to NATO is significant and enduring. It's important at this time that in order to maximise our reassurance and resilience effect, we coordinate through NATO and the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Few of us, Mr. Speaker, will not have been moved by President Zelensky's speech yesterday. His people are fighting for their very survival. His country is united against the aggression, and it is indeed his country's darkest hour. Yesterday I saw footage of a Russian armoured train bristling with guns, heading towards Mariupol. A brave, single woman from Ukraine ran to that train and shouted, "Slavo Ukrainia." Unmoved, unintimidated by the guns, the woman's bravery should inspire us all. I know many of our constituents, Mr. Speaker, and our colleagues are fearful of what happens next. President Putin and the Kremlin continue to threaten countries who offer help to Ukraine. Their military campaign will, I'm afraid, get more brutal and more indiscriminate. But, Mr. Speaker, it is my firm belief that our strength to stand up to such bullying comes from our alliances. As long as we stand united, both as a House and as the international community, then the Kremlin's threats cannot hurt us. We should take strength from the peoples right across Europe who are standing shoulder to shoulder to protect our values, our freedom, our tolerance, our democracy and our free press. That is our shield.
Yeah. We now come to the Shadow Secretary of State, John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Defence Secretary and his team for the way that he's kept members on all sides updated and informed, and I thank him for his statement this afternoon. Mr. Speaker, President Zelensky spoke for his country when he told us yesterday, "We will not give up and we will not lose." His address, like his leadership, was deeply moving, deeply inspiring. Ukrainians are showing massive bravery, both military and civilians alike, and we must do all we can to support their resistance. So the government has Labour's full backing for military and intelligence assistance to Ukraine to defend itself. And I welcome the Defence Secretary's statement today, the detail of the further weapons and equipment that Britain has been able to provide Ukraine to defend itself. I welcome the role we're playing in coordinating help from other countries to Ukraine. Can I urge him to conclude the examination he's now giving to the provision of Starstreak missiles as quickly as possible? These are exactly the sort of ground-to-air missiles needed to defend against Russian air attacks. Can I ask him more broadly, are these supplies to Ukraine solely from our UK stockpiles? Is the MOD purchasing also from other countries to respond to Ukrainian requests? And have other non-NATO, non-European countries with weaponry or well-trained air forces yet been involved? Mr. Speaker, it's clear that President Putin miscalculated on the resolve of the Ukrainian military and on the strength of his own Russian forces. Putin planned for a short campaign without the provision of logistics for protracted fighting and occupation. So what is the MOD's assessment of how far the Russians have now rectified this? And I think he said 65%, but could he confirm what proportion of Russian forces that were on Ukraine's borders and off her coast have now been deployed into Ukraine? This is only still week 2. Russia has such crushing firepower, Putin has such utter ruthlessness that we must expect more than one of his military objectives to be taken over the next few weeks. We must expect greater brutality with still further civilian casualties. And our thoughts and our prayers are with the residents of Kiev and those other great Ukrainian cities as they face encirclement and bombardment from Russian forces. Whatever the short-term gains Putin may secure, we must make sure he fails in the longer run. Through Ukrainian resistance, tougher sanctions, more humanitarian help, wider international isolation, justice for the war crimes being committed, and above all, lasting Western unity. We must be ready to deal with the consequences of this invasion, Mr. Speaker, for many years to come. It is, however, clear that Putin has also miscalculated on the international resolve to isolate Russia and on the strength of Western and NATO unity. Our Labour commitment to NATO is unshakable, and the government again has our full support for reinforcing NATO nations on the alliance's eastern border with Russia. The Labour leader and I fly out tonight to Tallinn to reassure Estonia of the united UK determination to defend their security and to thank our British forces deployed there from the Royal Tank Regiment and the Royal Welsh Battle Group. Mr. Speaker, it was Labour's post-war Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin who was the principal architect of NATO and in particular its Article 5 commitment to collective defence. Today is the anniversary of Bevin's birth in 1881. So today, let President Putin be in no doubt that our commitment to Article 5 is absolute. And let him not mistake NATO's restraint for any lack of resolve. Mr. Speaker, NATO's responsible force has been activated, as the Defence Secretary has said, in response to this NATO aggression. We welcome the detail of the UK's contribution to that. But what is the role also of the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force? What is the role that they could play? And is it not time for NATO to issue an initiating directive to the Supreme Allied Commander to plan future options as part of overhauling NATO, necessarily for the decade ahead? And could the Defence Secretary confirm what I think he said, which is that the 1,000 UK troops put on standby before the invasion are still in Britain, still on standby, and we've received no requests for the humanitarian help they were designed to respond to? Mr. Speaker, it's not the job of British forces to protect the failing Home Secretary or bail out border force, especially at this critical time of conflict. But yesterday, the Defence Secretary said help for Ukrainians fleeing the war had not been quick enough. He said he was offering MOD assistance to the Home Office. Has this offer been accepted? What role will military personnel play, where and for how long? And, Mr. Speaker, as we confront aggression abroad, we need to strengthen our defences at home. A national resilience strategy was promised a year ago. When will this be published? The integrated review, published a year ago, made the Prime Minister's first focus the Indo-Pacific. It neglected the need to rebuild relations with essential European allies and the European Union, and it planned to cut the British Army still further. Will the government now rethink such fundamental flaws in its integrated review? And finally, Mr. Speaker, if I may, we expect a big budget boost for defence in the Chancellor's spring statement in 2 weeks' time. With Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the government must respond to new threats to the UK and European security, just as Labour in government did after the Twin Towers attacks on 9/11. If the government does act, it will again have Labour's full support.
I am going to make mention of it. It's a very, very important issue. But front benches have to be in line with the rules. I've got to enforce the rules. It says 5 minutes, that was 7. Please, as important as if you want me to grant you queues, you want me to support statements, you've got to work with me to ensure that we don't take the time from other agendas that are here. It was very much shorter over. I do keep clocking the time and I don't need to get into an argument about it. I would say the Labour front bench took a lot longer. And I'm just going to say it's a very important matter. I want to keep this on the agenda, but you need to work with me to ensure that we or change the rules, make my life easier. So stay.
Mr. Speaker, maybe I should apologise. I didn't give the Labour front bench long enough with the statement. I think it was fairly short notice for them in advance. So I think we both hear from both sides. You wouldn't like me to be too long either. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the certainly on the backbench of the Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman makes some important questions, and I'm grateful for the Labour Party's support to the position that the government has taken on Ukraine. Our position actually mirrors also the international community, not just NATO members, but also members outside NATO, such as Sweden and Finland. In answer to his questions, Mr. Speaker, the stockpile, we will take them currently from our stockpile, but we will backfill them from the manufacturer where we can and when we can. We already have some on order, so I can give him that assurance. I also make sure we keep a basic level to ensure that we cover our own force protection as required. So we're not going to leave our soldiers at risk in somewhere like Estonia specifically, but nevertheless we will make sure that we calibrate that correctly. On the issue of the MOD's assessment of the Russian forces, over 90% of those forces that are on the border have now been committed to Ukraine and inside Ukraine. And of course, we can see media reports about Belarusian forces maybe or maybe not being primed. That has had an interesting effect on Belarusian forces, with reports of desertions and senior officers refusing to join the fight. And also, I think there's something very telling about Russia's desperation at the moment. We've seen significant amounts of effort to try and bring Wagner Group into Ukraine, Wagner Group being the wholly unacceptable mercenary company responsible for all sorts of atrocities in Africa and the Middle East, and the fact that Russia is now trying to encourage them to take part in Ukraine, I think is a telling sign. It doesn't give us any comfort, but it is nevertheless a sign. In answer to the honourable gentleman's questions about Jeff, I went last week to Copenhagen to meet with my Swedish, Lithuanian and Danish counterpart as they set off to join our EFP in Estonia. The Danish have sent a company of armoured infantry that was going to be escorted across the sea by a Swedish and Danish ship with air cover coming from Sweden, and that was a JEF deployment. A very good example of how, in the neighbourhood of the Nordics, we come together either bilaterally or multilaterally to make sure that we can provide greater defence. After our meeting in Leicestershire, Rutland actually, a few weeks ago, we determined to have a longer programme of joint planning so we can make sure we maximise our capabilities in exercises and activity, and we will see more of the JEF, and I'm very happy to continue to keep the House absolutely informed. On Article 5, I am grateful for the reminder of Bevan's birthday. Forgive me, on this side of the House, I would not be carrying that date particularly. I am always welcome to be educated. I have some Labour in my own family, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure they know in 1881 either. But nevertheless, the commitment to Article 5 is important. Yesterday I met my counterpart from North Macedonia, the newest member of NATO. And the thing I think is important about Britain's attitude to NATO is we're not in it for what we can get out of it. We're in it because we fundamentally believe in defending each other, whether you're big or small, and we all stand for the same values. So I was pleased to meet it. Mr. Speaker, I promise to keep members of the House informed of Ukraine no matter what happens. My team is available, Chief of Defence Intelligence is available, and I will happily continue to do either dial-ins or indeed as many briefings as possible, both at Privy Council and non-Privy Council levels. On the point about the Home Office, the honourable gentleman asked the question. We have offered, the offer has been accepted in principle. There is a meeting straight after this between Defence Ministers, Home Office Ministers and Foreign Office Ministers to make sure we coordinate what assistance we can give to speed up that visa process, which I think is incredibly important to do. Just on the IR, I think it is important not to mischaracterise the IR. I know the honourable gentleman has said this before. The actual quote in the IR about Russia is, quote, "the greatest nuclear conventional, military and sub-threshold threat to European security, to strengthen Europe, which is critical to preserving our security and prosperity of the Atlantic." The IR did not miss Europe, did not miss Russia. In fact, it squarely identified it as our main adversary, and I think it would be wrong to characterise it as everyone's off to the Pacific. Certainly, if you look at the balance of my investments, as I've made as Defence Secretary, and the investments in basing and expeditionary forces such as JEF, that is in Europe and north in Europe as well. So I think that is incredibly important. I shall pass on details to the relevant ministry. I suspect it's the Cabinet Office in charge of the National Resilience Strategy, and like him, I look forward to reading it.
William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend and the Government and the Prime Minister on the manner in which they're conducting themselves in relation to this dreadful invasion in Ukraine. Could I also add, having just come back from a conference in Paris, where I had the honour to lead the European Select Committee delegation in conjunction with all the other countries in the whole of Europe, how much they appreciate what we're doing here in the United Kingdom. And could I also just mention that my son actually is currently in Poland and Hungary on humanitarian work, and I trust that other people will be able to do much the same, because this is so important, not only to our constituents, but to the whole of fairness, justice in the world. I want to thank my honourable friend for everything that he's done. Yeah.
So State.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his kind comments? Can I just say on the humanitarian work, it's incredibly important that we recognise this is not just a military response. The scale of the humanitarian crisis that will only grow as Russia seeks to punish the innocent for having the tenacity to stand up to them means that we have to all lean in as an international community. I would urge colleagues who have emails from numerous constituents wanting to help that we channel them in the right direction. Some of us are old enough to remember the Bosnia War, and I know from soldiers on the ground at the time, there were lots of people who meant well, who would drive out there and then find themselves putting themselves at risk, and indeed some of the forces whose job it was to protect them. So I think we just need to make sure it is properly coordinated. I'll get details for honourable and right honourable members in the House so that they can point their constituents in the right direction. Thank you.
SNP spokesperson Stuart M. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary for advance sight of the statement, and like the Shadow Secretary and the Secretary of State himself, put on record how grateful we are to President Zelensky for taking the time to talk to this House yesterday. It's a moment, I'm sure, that will stay with all of us for a long, long time to come. Mr. Speaker, to the content of the statement says that the Secretary and the Department will explore the donation of these new anti-air missiles. I guess we just want to urge them to conclude that as swiftly as possible and ensure that they get there as swiftly as possible, because it is the case that as this conflict goes on, second week going into its third as it is now, Ukraine's needs will adapt, and the support we give them has to adapt with that. I do also want to ask the Secretary, because I know we talked about this before, it might actually have been with his Armed Forces Minister, the supply of satellite phones, which I know Ukraine had identified as an urgent need for 2 weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, I do also want to ask about this issue of the jets from Poland. As I understand the situation at the moment, the US has declined its involvement in that, but the Department of Defence has said it will keep it under review. Is the Secretary of State part of that discussion to keep it under review, not least given the new security and defence arrangements that the Department announced around 6 or 7 weeks ago involving Poland and Ukraine itself? And how might we expect that to develop in the coming days? Because time is not on Ukraine's side, and I appreciate the immense sensitivities around this. Mr. Speaker, like many others, I want to welcome the additional military aid, the non-lethal aid, the humanitarian support, and of course welcome all of the efforts of our constituents up and down the land in supporting Ukrainians in their time of need. On NATO, Mr. Speaker, can I ask about the forthcoming strategic concept? What sort of changes can we expect to see there? Will we, for example, see the air policing mission be reprofiled to an air defence mission? And can he talk a bit more about what the House can expect to come from that? And lastly, Mr. Speaker, because you would expect me to, just to say, on the issue of refugees, we have tried, and in fairness, the government has made it easy on many things to support the government and the front bench in its support for Ukraine in many other areas. But on refugees, we are simply standing out in Europe for all the wrong reasons. And I am pleading with the Minister, although it's not his department, to fix it and fix it soon.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. On the latter, look, we are, like you, determined to fix it. My honourable friend, the Minister of the Armed Forces, will have a meeting this afternoon on exactly that. I think we shouldn't forget that the overall offer is generous, 200,000 in the families route and unlimited in the humanitarian. The key here is to get it sped up to make sure that when people arrive in that border, they are home and safe with their families as soon as possible. And we will do everything in the Ministry of Defence to support that happening. On the other issue, on jets in Poland, I don't have access to those discussions. I have said publicly that the position the United Kingdom government would take is, look, it is a matter for the Polish government to make its decision on its calibration, on its aid to Ukraine, but as an ally and friend of Poland, Britain will stand by whatever decision they make. It is, of course, them on the front line, off that border, and whatever consequence were to happen of that, I would hope the consequence would only be a positive if they did it, but you never know with President Putin. So it's very important to give them the reassurance and the space to make the decision. But fundamentally, what we see at the moment is the requirement of the Ukrainians are things like being able to take action against artillery at deep ranges, and that can be done through the UAVs, to protect their airspace, and that can be done with the missile systems that we are providing at the moment. The only lag with the missile systems we're doing is, as they get more complicated, they need training. How and why we deliver that training and how we do it is obviously sensitive, but we have to make sure that is rolled out, and obviously the movement of it into Ukraine. They are valuable pieces of equipment that need to be positioned in the right places to make the difference, and I think that is just one of the reasons why I've wanted to come to the House as soon as possible to say we are in principle going to do it, but we want to make sure that you had as early warning as possible. The honourable gentleman makes a really important point about the strategic concept and NATO. I think I'll too be asking some of the questions about what now for it. I think there are questions for NATO both in short term, Mr. Speaker, and long term. So in the long term, what are we going to do post-Ukraine to contain Russia, to provide reassurance to our neighbours and our fellow NATO members, and resilience to those countries in NATO who will need it? And I think I would hope that we start the process at the meeting next week of indicating to Saka that I would like to see him start planning for containment if that is one of the options post-Ukraine. And what does that look like in the 21st century? Thank you very much.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and for all that his department and our incredible armed forces are doing at this time to help the people of Ukraine. The humanitarian crisis, Mr. Speaker, is worsening hour by hour. Can my right honourable friend assure my constituents in Penrith and the Border and people across the UK that the UK is doing everything it can, cross-government, to widen and accelerate the visa system, cut through the red tape, and work practically and compassionately with our partners in Europe to offer sanctuary and aid to as many Ukrainian people as we can and as quickly as we can?
I think the honourable member would have heard my answer to my Scottish National colleague on the other side of the House. I think what I would say is absolutely the Minister of the Armed Forces will be happy to brief you once those meetings have taken place to update you on the assistance the MOD can give.
Derek Chway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first say to the Secretary of State, thank him for the regular and excellent updates and briefings we have, and also thank him for the hard work he's putting in within the constraints he has to work within to Ukraine. However, can I say to him that I do think it's a strategic mistake that when confronting a tyrant, we actually tell him what we won't do. Now, well, if Putin remains in power, it's my view that we will have to confront him at some point militarily, and we should be aware of that and get that out in the open, I think. But my question is this, is what level of slaughter of Ukrainians are we willing to see before NATO and the West intervenes militarily in Ukraine, such as, for instance, ensuring safe areas in western Ukraine? Yeah, good question.
No flights. Okay. Look, I'm grateful to that honourable gentleman. Look, it is a difficult balance about when we tell people. I have to come to this House effectively to get policy permission from you before we take a different step in the weapons systems. And I think that is the right thing to do. We have to make sure it's calibrated into the right process. And I think it is important with Putin, especially as he would seek to discover things and use potentially to escalate, that we are upfront and transparent about what we're going to do, so he cannot come and try and repackage it as something, a major strategic issue. It's not an easy line. On the one hand, I would be quite happy to sometimes do this, but I think the decision about bringing the House with us on this and making sure people understand. I don't think it will be a tactical difference on the ground that I've come to the House today to tell people in advance that this is happening. Russia now has a serious problem with the international community's donations. They are at a large scale, whether they're anti-tank or Stinger missiles, that has had to change their tactics as a result. So I think it would be wrong for him to characterise this as anything other than us responding to their change in tactics, but making sure he doesn't get impunity to bomb people from the air and kill innocent victims. On the other issue around areas like humanitarian corridors and indeed no-fly zones, we just have to be careful. You have to enforce them. And in thinking about enforcing them, you have to recognise the knock-on effects of whether you trigger a wider war in Europe.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Defence Secretary and all the ministerial team working so hard on this, and all those in main building and those in uniform throughout our armed forces responding so well to the war in Ukraine. He mentions just over 3,600 new light anti-tank weapons. They've been put to very good use, as the Defence Secretary will know. Can he reassure the House that that supply will continue and at pace? And secondly, he mentions about consideration of the surface-to-air missiles, the system Starstreak. How long will that decision-making process take?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. First of all, the decision has been made as a sense in principle. That's why I came to the House, that we will provide them. What we've got to make sure is we provide them with the training and the capability to deliver that. Can I just thank my right honourable friend for the effort he put in to work with the Speaker to deliver the speech yesterday by President Zelensky. I cannot tell you, between the two of you, Mr. Speaker, Regan, and others, I think how important it was to hear from a man who is clearly leading his country from the front, but is also under tremendous personal threat from Russia.
Leila Moran.
Mr. Speaker, can I first say thank you to the Defence Secretary for the approach he takes, for being the calm voice of competence that we want to hear in this crisis. He shouldn't have to intervene in the Home Office. I'm glad he is, though, and I thank him also for stepping up where his colleagues are failing again. He will know that this is not just the right thing to do, it is strategically the important thing to do, because Putin is counting on Europe not getting the refugee crisis right, because that plays into his hands in the medium and longer term. Would he agree with my concern that if we don't get a grip on the refugee crisis soon, across the whole of Europe, including in this country, then we could well be playing into those fears?
I'm grateful for the Honourable Lady for her comments. Look, one of the most important things is recognising that President Putin, and as we saw, the President of Belarus, used migrant flows deliberately to divide and put pressure on our system. It's why, when they did that in Belarus, literally shoving people through fences is what the Belarusians did a few months ago. We sent 100 Royal Engineers to assist the Poles to manage that issue. And I think it is incredibly important that we all think about what happens. Many of us who were warning about what Russia was going to do warned a number of countries, and actually, in fact, requested to the European... I said to the European Union, where you can add value is to plan for mass refugees in a way that we have not seen since the war. That's really important. That's where the European Union is at its best, in coordinating the non-military responses. I think they've done well, but they're not the only ones who are not, they're not shielded from the criticism as well. I think we all have to do it internationally. We have to do it better. We have to do the visa bit faster. My colleagues are absolutely coming to bear to bring those assets from MOD, but we also should remember we act as a team. I'm not intervening in the Home Office. Government is a team, and we're working together as a team to deliver that.
Blake Grubman.
Although Putin has committed virtually all his forces he had pre-positioned, we know he has more modern equipment still to deploy. Are we able to determine whether those additional forces are ready to deploy?
Honourable friend, so first of all, he has deployed some of his most modern equipment. He has gone all in, I think, as people would say, and played his full hand. You will have seen only recently a SA-22, or a Panaster anti-air medium-range missile system that has been defeated by the mud of Ukraine with a burst tyre, and it's stuck in the mud. So he has absolutely managed to... He's gone all in. He's risked some of his most important equipment. He's using significant numbers of his missile stocks, and he is taking huge risk around the wider boundaries of Russia that he is now leaving effectively thinned out from defence.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was a report on Reuters yesterday that dozens of former paras have signed up for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion and that hundreds more are expected to do so. Could he give the House absolute clarity on the UK's government position in relation to those volunteers?
So the government's position is if you are a serving member of the armed forces, you will be breaking the law. I'm anticipating that there were reports in the weekend newspaper about, I think, 3 members who had gone AWOL over the weekend. They will be breaking the law and they will be prosecuted when they return for going absent without leave or deserting. For others, as the government's travel advice is don't go to Ukraine, we strongly discourage them from joining these forces. My experience, having been security minister, is people who went off to join the YPG and other organisations, it didn't end well. It is also the case, as a number of them are now discovering, that the Ukrainians are very clear. You turn up, you're in it for the whole game. You're not in it for a selfie in 6 weeks. You are in it for real. And I think we have seen already some people at the border decide that maybe not be the right option to follow.
Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, I understand that it would be possible at very short notice to reopen Manston Airport in Kent, to fly out humanitarian aid such as pharmaceuticals, and to fly in refugees who can then be processed at Manston Barracks. That will require the cooperation and the effort of the Ministry of Defence, as well as the cooperation of the Department for Levelling Up. I'm not asking for a guarantee now, but would my right honourable friend speak with our right honourable friend, the member for Surrey Heath, to see what possibilities there might be there?
I'm grateful for the right honourable friend's question. Look, at the moment we have the capacity we need and we have the landing slots and the landing fields we need to deliver whatever we need to do. If, however, there is greater pressure, I'll be absolutely delighted to talk to both him and my colleague for Surrey Heath to see whether we can take advantage of his kind offer.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, and again my thanks to the Defence Secretary for all he's doing in the compassionate way that he's doing it. Again, my question relates to a constituent and is not necessarily his departmental area, but I'd be grateful if he could follow it up. My constituent who lives in the Donbass 4 weeks ago, drove across the country, managed to get through to Poland and has been waiting for a visa for his wife and their infant daughter for the last 4 weeks. He has heard nothing from the Home Office. He's running out of money and wants to get home with his family. Please can he urge the Home Office to do their job?
If the Honourable Lady gives the details to my PPS, I'll be happy to make that representation to the Home Office.
Well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House again to keep us informed. And he was right when he said at the beginning that the whole House was moved by the address from the President of Ukraine yesterday. The President of Ukraine has spoken again today and is desperate for aircraft to protect women and children from being bombed and killed by Russians. Poland has acted, but there is a hold-up because of the response from the United States. The Secretary of State did touch on this before, but could he be clear that he supports what Poland is doing, and could he put pressure on America to support that action?
Look, I think what I would say is 2 things to my right honourable friend. Is first of all, look, I support the steps to allow Ukraine to continue to fly in its own airspace, its sovereign airspace, to deliver military effect against those massive amounts of Russian artillery that are indiscriminately killing and bombing around the country, and I think that's incredibly important. It's one of the reasons why the no-fly zone is a problem, because both sides don't fly. We need to protect anti-air capability off Ukraine. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, what is the most appropriate tools? Obviously, the Ukrainians know, they have said what they wish. I think we have acted on when they've asked us, and that's why the new missiles we're talking about today are coming forward. Look, it is a matter for Poland. I said I will support whatever their choice is. In the meantime, we will continue to try and meet the outcomes that Ukraine wants with whatever methods we can.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Rather than getting to the stage where we might need to rely on MOD assistance to get refugees here, I'm sure the Secretary of State would agree it's better to get people back here to the UK while they can. Same with humanitarian aid. We've got the bizarre situation where there's people that's displaced in Ukraine might come to rely or need to use humanitarian aid, but yet they could already be here in the UK where they've got family members. So if the UK is not going to lift the visa requirements for Ukrainians coming here, surely with the existing scheme where it applies to family members of British and Ukrainians already live in the UK, we can use the information we've got here, bring the people here and then process and do the security checks while they're here safely in the UK rather than wasting resources in Ukraine to be better deployed elsewhere.
I think it is possible to do both, I think you can process them very quickly out there, and the key here is well, that's what we're going to try and fix this afternoon.
John Whitting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 3 years ago, I visited Mariupol with my right honourable friend's predecessor, Michael Fallon, and we heard the appreciation of the Ukrainian armed forces of the help that we were already giving them then through Operation Orbital. Can I therefore strongly welcome the announcement that my right honourable friend has made this afternoon? And does he agree with the Secretary-General of NATO that the sight of bodies lying on streets unburied in Mariupol is credible evidence that Russia is guilty of war crimes?
Recording them.
Well, first of all, I think, as I previously reported, the ICC have opened a campaign and a number of countries, including Britain, are collecting evidence. Canada is taking quite a strong lead, and I think it's important that we follow the evidence. I think the open source reports of both civilian bodies and actually abandoned Russian dead by their own forces is a crime in itself. I mean, what a disgrace that the Russian generals have abandoned those young men to be murdered. Not murdered, to be killed, sorry, not murdered, but have been killed. That's the leadership of the Russian army that deserves to be in court for betraying their own soldiers and at the same time for what they're doing to the civilians of Ukraine. They are criminally responsible and I hope they face justice.
John Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for updating us on the actions of the UK in support of the Ukrainians' heroic defence of their country. He will have noted that his update was much more warmly received than that of the Home Office yesterday, and with good reason, and I do hope Home Office ministers have noted that as well. We must act on all fronts. The need for humanitarian assistance is overwhelming. Could he say a little bit more about the 1,000 UK troops who are on standby? I understand from his statement they are still on standby to provide humanitarian assistance where they are and the circumstances under which they will be deployed.
So, to answer the honourable lady, first of all, we haven't yet had any requests for humanitarian support from neighbouring countries. As soon as they do, we will be very happy to deploy those troops to help in that process. We've got a meeting, obviously, next week in NATO, and maybe those things will come to a fore then, but that's what they're there for. They're earmarked to do exactly that. Just on her point at the Home Office, having been a Home Office Minister, having sat in opposition across Home Secretaries from the Labour Party, it is never an easy job in the Home Office. It is never a popular brief, and questions are never kind.
Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Could I please thank the Secretary of State for his bold and forthright leadership, and also pay tribute to all those in the MOD, FCDO and beyond who are burning the midnight oil. I consider the level of operational detail in his statement to be unprecedented as well, so I'm grateful. The Secretary of State will know the importance of close air support in a tactical environment. Could I please ask him what's been done to specifically support the Ukrainian Air Force?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Well, first of all, the HVM to a system to fly freely in the airspace. Also, one of the ways they're delivering close air support or actually fires in depth is through the Turkish TB2 UAVs, which are delivering munitions onto their artillery and indeed their supply lines, which are incredibly important in order to slow down or block the Russian advance.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement, for his clear commitment to military equipment that has been given and donated and given to the Ukrainians, also especially for the Star Streak anti-air missiles as well, which will down even more Russian aeroplanes and helicopters. We look forward to that. Can I ask the Secretary of State this question? In terms of support for Odessa, the last Ukrainian port that is open to Ukrainians to use, and they severely damaged one of the Russian ships just this week. Can I outline what naval support and capability is available for what is undoubtedly the next step in the Russian war of aggression to keep that last Ukrainian port open?
So the honourable gentleman makes an important point about the southern flank, the one area where the Russians had made advances in the south, obviously using Crimea, which they illegally annexed in 2014. That part of the sea around both Odessa and elsewhere is heavily mined, which has helped Ukraine defend its coastline, and in fact the media reporting of that ship that was hit, we can assume is made by a mine, but is unverified as well. Of course, the Russian Navy is blockading those ports, and that is limited, gives limited capability to the Ukrainians to take those ships on. If there are ways we can help them do that, we will explore it.
Brother Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have huge respect for my right honourable friend and his team for the way you've conducted this awful situation. Understandably, my Polish constituents are incredibly worried because of Putin's expansionism and the threat to Poland, and I have, I hope my right honourable friend will agree with me, the huge humanitarian effort from Poland with supporting hundreds of thousands of refugees and their proposed military support. So will my right honourable friend continue to ensure that Britain throws a protective arm around Poland, given the risks that plucky country is facing? And just finally, will he, if Putin does start to carpet bomb across Ukraine, will he and NATO reconsider the issue of the no-fly zone? I understand the position he comes from, though, as he set out earlier.
Just on the no-fly zone, I think we've set out our position. I'm not going to go into hypotheticals, what ifs, but nevertheless, at the moment, the balance is I don't think it suits actually the Ukrainian disposition, given the amounts of heavy armour and missiles in the Russian stocks. And I think, if you had a no-fly zone, the Russians have a massive advantage with shells and missiles, and they would not stop in a no-fly zone, whereas the few things the Ukrainians have to reach the Russians at depth are in the air, and I think you would actually hamper one. On the resilience and support to Poland, we put 150 soldiers out there, 100 soldiers when the Belarusian migrant crisis was happening. We've got nearly 700 soldiers there now, helping them both in resilience and indeed, if we need, for humanitarian issues. I have spoken to my Polish counterpart yesterday. I'm hoping to visit next week. We will also look at air defence requests from them to protect their airfields. They are an ally for over 150 years. We stand absolutely by Poland, shoulder to shoulder. And I think it's really important, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to military requests, that we are putting it where it makes a difference and putting it where SACEUR wants it. There's a danger often in these events that we spread our forces all round for reassurances, but not necessarily to achieve the military tasks that we need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to thank the Secretary of State for Defence. It's now very clear that we need to recontain Russia, and that is going to mean resupplying Ukrainian forces, refortifying our front line, but crucially it's going to mean repressing the Russian economy. Now, at the moment, nobody can recognise the 275 figure that is being used for the number of sanctions that have been issued. The Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday heard evidence that the government simply was not ready. And even today, the family of the founder of the Wagner Group have still not been sanctioned here, even though they've been sanctioned in Europe. So when the Secretary of State sees the Foreign Secretary later today, could he ask her to get her act together?
I'd have to have pretty wide eyesight. She's in Washington at the moment. But if I were to, I had some massive binoculars, I would definitely pass it on. Look, I'm happy to try and get to the bottom of all the figures, both the amount of money that has been sanctioned. The statistics I had is that the UK have frozen more funds in London than Europe and the United States completely, and I think that matters. The construct of sanctions are all different in different countries, but I'd be very happy to look into that. And look, I don't think there should be any hiding place, and nor does the Foreign Secretary, for any of these Moscow hoods that are running around, including the dreadful Wagner Group.
John Barrell.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Speaker. In commending the government for its robust response to this dreadful invasion, and notwithstanding existing levels of support and our Article 5 commitment to NATO, the government is right to rule out a no-fly zone and also to emphasise it's a difficult balance to ensure that any defensive support is calibrated not to escalate matters to a strategic level. With that in mind, talk of Polish jets being donated What assurances can my right honourable friend give that this will indeed, whatever the outcome, achieve the right balance? Because a wider war would not serve the interests of any population, let alone Ukraine.
Secretary of State.
My right honourable friend makes some wise observations, but just on the jet issue and all lethal aid issue, it is, in a sense, unique for each individual country to make the choice it has to make. It is. You know, I have the duty of defending this wonderful nation, and it is those people I have to answer for, and we have to calibrate it as suits. And if the Polish government feels the security threat is so acute that it requires itself to do that, then I would fully understand their decision and stand by them. Remember, the countries that will face the direct consequence of a successful Russia in Ukraine are the bordering countries, because we know in Putin's mind some of those aren't, in his ideas, genuine countries, and some of those countries are the very countries that he historically feels should either be punished or indeed should be coerced into his way of thinking.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. In echoing the thanks to the Secretary of State and his team, could he pass on the House's thanks to all of his teams who are making this happen? On the Polish jets issue, it is of course a matter for Poland, but given that we've given man-pads and anti-tank weapons, would he regard the gift of aircraft as a defensive system, which is the word he has used in his statement?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think it depends how you use those aircraft. If you are close air support to Kyiv, then it's obviously defensive. If you are seeking to enter another sovereign's territory like Russian Air Force, then it is not. And I think that is important to recognise. But I'm afraid, as I said, I think it's a deeply bilateral decision for those countries. But as a friend and ally of Poland, we would stand by their decision.
Sir Desmond Swayne.
He was warning for months precisely what was coming. Why didn't we use the time that he gave us to forward deploy resources to deal with the inevitable flow of applications from refugees that was coming?
Secretary of State.
Quite know how to answer that question. Look, I think the importance is we're going to fix the here and now.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. How much of the MOD spending in response to the crisis is going to be accounted for as ODA? What impact has the government's decision to slash the aid budget and abolish DFID had on its ability to coordinate the humanitarian response?
Secretary of State.
I'm not sure the government's decision to abolish DFID affected President Putin's judgment one bit.
Tim Lawson.
Mandate Speaker, can I applaud the personal lead being taken by my right honourable friend and the strong role of the MOD and our forces. The Home Affairs Select Committee this morning took worrying evidence from the Ukrainian ambassador and Ukrainian support groups. Can I make two requests from that? Firstly, there are reports that there are many thousands of Ukrainian children unaccompanied across the border who've been taken there for safety, and that number is growing. Can he make the offer that when the welcome humanitarian and military supplies go in military planes, he includes personnel from SAFA, the largest employer of social workers, to help with the safeguarding worries that are now carrying on the border, and preferably bring them back to the UK and do the checks that may need to be done in the UK, where you don't need to change the law to grant them a 6-month visitor visa at the very least. And secondly, my Ukrainian constituents tell me that their friends in Ukraine are ordering over the internet body armour from British companies because they are desperately short for their reserve and volunteer forces. We need to do more to help equip those people who have bravely gone to the front line and weren't part of the standing military and don't have the sort of kit that we would expect.
Secretary of State.
On the last point, included in the increased package is more body armour alongside many of the countries that donated in the conference in February. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm slightly in danger of entering into Home Office questions here. I know they were yesterday. While I was a Home Office Minister, one of the greatest delights was not being the Immigration Minister, but rather the Security Minister. So all I would say is I understand the feeling in the House, so does the Home Secretary, so does the Prime Minister, and we are working to resolve that speed as quick as possible. As for the internal details of different immigration schemes, I would gently refer my honourable friend, the right honourable friend, to the Home Office.
I will protect the Secretary of State from the temptation to stray out with his own territory. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I give my thanks to the Defence Secretary for his work and that of his team and for his compassion. I'm afraid I am going to raise another visa issue with him. My constituent is trying to get his young niece to the UK after she fled her home in Ukraine. After endless bureaucratic checks and delays, they've been told today she has to travel nearly 300 kilometres across Poland to get the decision on her visa. The Defence Secretary will understand that refugees like my constituent's niece have already made long and challenging journeys from Ukraine to Poland. Now more journeys just to get the decision. My constituent calls the government's approach to people fleeing the war in Ukraine inhumane. Given the meeting on the visa process he mentioned, can he press on the Home Secretary the need to offer a compassionate and human response to refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at the risk of your anger, I will be delighted to pass that case to my private parliamentary secretary and press on the Home Office to resolve it. If I indulge myself, then I think Madam Deputy Speaker will rule me out, because this is a question about the Ukraine situation through defence.
No, the Secretary of State is steering a careful and a wise course, and I will endeavour to help him in doing so, but it is the case that, of course, the government is acting as one, and we all recognise that. Thank you. Where am I? Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. President Putin was clearly counting on a quick victory. So I congratulate my right honourable friend not only for his statement, but the far-sighted view of training Ukrainian troops and indeed supplying defensive weapons. What assessment has he made of the effectiveness of both that training and the defensive weapons in theatre, which of course can never be tested other than in theatre?
Secretary of State.
But I think there are two parts, my honourable friend. One is going to be the lessons learned, whatever happens, that we need to learn for our own defences and our own capabilities. I think it is absolutely the case that one of the other assumptions President Putin made was that the Russian army was invincible, and that for all the money they spent, it didn't really matter about the people in them, and it didn't matter about battle preparation and all the things you do to prepare people to go to war. They didn't do that. Some of these so-called invincible weapons are now being taken apart by handheld weapons, some of which are supplied by Britain. I think it's something, it's not something to gloat about. This is, in the end, about the loss of human life, but it is absolutely something to be proud that Britain